Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled High and Dry, Future-Proofing Your Business Against Water Risk. This webinar will highlight the ways in which water can pose a risk to your business both now and in the future. It will describe how tools such as scenario planning can help you get a handle on water risk and how that knowledge can inform your business strategy, planning, and investments. It will be presented by Dr. Nathan Richardson, Director of Atkins Water and Environment, and Dr. Jeff Darch, Atkins Climate Futures Team. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A chat box. Type in your questions and we'll take it up at the end of our session during our Q&A session. During the webinar, we'll be administering 2 polls and we'll be discussing the results. Please listen and follow the instructions given when the time comes. The exit questionnaire after the webinar, so if you would please just take a few minutes to fill it out, it will be greatly appreciated. To have 2 presenters from Atkins Global, Dr. Jeff Darch and Dr. Nathan Richardson. Dr. Jeff Darch is the Head of Climate and Environmental Futures at Atkins. He leads applied research and consultancy projects assessing future risks and works with clients to develop robust response strategies. Dr. Nathan Richardson is a director within the water and environment business at Atkins. His career in the UK water industry before moving into consultancy, where he has more than 20 years experience working on water management issues. Atkins has over 1,000 water engineers and scientists worldwide. Nathan heads up a team of water management specialists who work with clients around the globe to help them address their current and future water supply, pollution control, and flood risk issue challenges in a sustainable manner. I would like to present to you now our first presenter, Dr. Nathan Richardson. Dr. Richardson, I'll hand over the floor to you now.
Thank you very much, Alison. Good day, everyone. I'm Nathan Richardson. I'm a director in Atkins within the Water and Environment team. Water risk management, because water is our most fundamental resource, but give it the value it deserves. I'm concerned that the low price of water means we fail to recognise exposure as business communities to water risk, but over the longer term. Jeff Darch, who heads up our climate change and environmental futures business. The webinar is split into 3 sections. Firstly, I'm going to talk about what water risk is, how it can affect businesses both now and in the future, and why I think businesses need to go beyond consideration of short-term operational risks and strategic long-term water risk. Then I'll over to Jeff about how to undertake a water risk assessment and develop a plan for mitigating risks and maximising opportunities associated with water. The questions and answers after the presentations, and use the Q&A area to submit questions through the presentation. So with a strategic long-term water risk. The world is a dynamic place. 3, people have faced change and uncertainty about the future. However, the pace of change seems to be accelerating, and we're now seeing a number of global challenges that change the way we live. Not global population rising, but how we choose to live is changing too. People are increasingly concentrated in urban areas, and as nation rises and people live longer, we're faced with a challenge over how to allocate scarce resources. More of the world's population, 2.4 billion people, live in stressed countries, and by 2025, the number is expected to rise to 2/3 of the world's population. Our environment is changing too. We will experience some degree of climate change due to historic emissions and the lag in the climate system. We're going to need to adapt to changing temperatures and rainfall patterns, as well as extreme events such as flooding and drought. Across all of this, fundamental to life but competing demands present us with a challenge over how to use this resource in the future. It has a key role to play. A statistic in the recent CDP Water Report that used by 180 of the top global businesses would be sufficient to provide 50 litres a day to the population for 40 years. If we quickly add the challenges for business, there are different types of water risk. And I think these different types are 2 degrees event in Temporal and recent blogs on the risk and strategy group of 2 degrees. I'll look at these in turn. Risks are associated with not having the right amount of water at the quality in the right place at the right time. So this includes being unable to use abstracted water or the business premises. Levels of quality being low, be able to discharge wastewater. This physical risk that we've been doing with one of the largest holiday villages in Europe, we assessed its current and future vulnerability to flooding, a coast protection scheme to protect and mitigate against future flood risk. The second is financial risks, resulting clients incurring costs beyond the cost of purchasing water, such as wrong insurance premiums or a low investor confidence. Increasingly scrutinising how businesses that they money into are exposed to water risk. We, with the government of Jordan, to advise them on the financial risks associated with investing in a wastewater treatment plant at Amra. Risks are associated with a negative perception of a business by customers or investors because of the way it handles or doesn't handle water risk in its global operation. And with a major international minerals company to help them with stakeholder concerns around water pollution from their nations. The concerns were picked up in the media, and they came at a time when the company was expanding and to get listed on the stock exchange. So consequences of not addressing water risk will be significant. Regulatory risks. These are associated with current compliance, but also changes in the regulatory regime in the future of water issues, so permitting or water allocations. And agricultural clients reduce water use and develop winter storage, and with a number of businesses to assess impacts to their operation of tightening effluent standards. The good that business risks associated with water are being increasingly recognised by companies. In the 2013 CDP Water Report, 7% of respondents identified water as a substantive business risk, and this was 53% just 2 years ago. The main risks identified by different businesses vary from sector to sector, and it shows the top 3 water risks identified by a range of them. Risks, including water scarcity and flooding, come out imminently, and regulatory uncertainty. Grid damage was listed by the industrial sector as a significant risk. Well, an expensive resource to purchase, unlike energy, the cost of water risks materialising can be high. There's some real-life examples of the consequences associated with water risks. Just as an example, during the European heatwave in 2003, a producer had to shut down a quarter power plants because water temperatures in the river extracted from were too high, and water levels were too low to discharge effluent, and the company would import power at a cost of over $400 million. Businesses and organisations have got a good handle on their recent and current water use and water efficiency within the factory gate. We believe that to deal adequately with water risks, it's necessary to think in 4 further dimensions. The first mention, which we discussed, is breadth. In the range of risks facing making a case for action on water, whether they're regulatory, financial, physical, or reputational. The section is spatial. We need to think about water risks beyond the factory gate. Look at water. The risk faced is very much dependent on the catchment or in which the business operates and the activities that are taking place. The impact of water abstraction will depend on the wider availability of water with catchment. The effect charge is to the quality of the receiving water. Elsewhere in the catchment can have significant impact on flood risk. Also characterised by different stakeholders with water interests. Is vertical, looking at water risk through the lens of your suppliers, customers and investors as own operations. Your business, no doubt, indirectly exposed to water risk through the supply chain, and the level of exposure will depend on the complexity of that supply chain, where suppliers are located, the type of goods and services they provide you with, and other factors such as their placeability. If you're to understand your exposure to water risk, you need to know how your suppliers are affected by water issues as well as operations. This can be a source of risk, particularly around reputation. I mentioned is look to risk may change through time. The CDP report highlights that around 2/3 of respondents expect water risks to in their business in the next 5 years. However, few businesses get their resilience beyond this near-term horizon, integrating thinking on how they'll adapt to and manage longer-term water risks within strategies and investment planning. I give scale of the challenge and pace of the change more attention to be given to understanding future water risk. And pick up on this theme in his part of the webinar. Finish my section of the webinar with a poll, which then we'll open up for you. The posing is, what types of water risk do you think will be most significant for your company or organisation in the next 10 years? Financial, regulatory, reputational, or the above. So one of the answers, by clicking on it in the section over to the right-hand side of the screen. Choosing one of the answers, you type any specific water risks envisage you may face over this timescale in this area. So we should see the results of the poll coming in 5 or 10 seconds. Yes, it's very interesting to see what risks organisations may be facing over this timescale. Okay, well, I can't see the results of the poll, so I'll continue. There we go, they've just come up. So we've got of the above, 44%, high regulatory risks, 44%, and reputational and physical, 53%, actual risks, 22%. That's very similar to a poll that we did with our own business yesterday. Just to summarise this section of the webinar, what I noted is why businesses should be thinking about water risks, and hopefully got across why analysis needs beyond short-term consideration of operational risks to consider a wider range from their vertical and temporal scales. understanding to inform business planning, investments, and research and development. To go on into more detail of how to actually undertake a water risk assessment, and in particular provide some examples that can get a handle on your risks and uncertainties. Over to you.
Thanks. Part of the webinar, I'm going to focus on how businesses can understand their long-term strategic water risks, a framework that we have come up with to help companies understand and mitigate their water risks. Many will be familiar with some of the existing tools that we use to assess water risk, which are highlighted on the diagram. Each tool is designed to provide companies with information on water risk that they put in their temporal focus, as shown on the diagram. Focus on water performance and compliance in present operations. They help companies answer questions such as, how much water do I use? How much do I save? What direct and indirect cost of the water saved? While tools all have different strengths and are appropriate for different situations, not very far at assessing risk into the future, and most consider the short term, less 5 years. To project into the future are generally limited to consideration of risks associated with climate change, or provide examples of actions or activities to manage future risk, rather than to develop bespoke business strategies. We start to look at how to carry out a bespoke risk assessment. I'd like to ask you a question. How far into the future does your company consider its water risk? So there's another poll here. You could choose again from one of the following answers. So the company has not considered water risk, or considers it on a horizon of 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 25 years, or 25 years plus. This is now up, so you should be able to click on one of those 5 categories. Please also feel free to write down any extra thoughts or comments, either in the chat area, or if it's more of a question, please do that within the Q&A area. So I've got a few more seconds to complete poll. So we're looking for no consideration of water risk to these 4 different categories, which we've selected. I get a short delay now while we publish the results. Very interesting to see how far into the future different companies are looking. Our experience is that they tend to be pretty short term, as I mentioned, on the sort of 0 to 5 year horizon, with some companies having invested in longer term. See how some more publish the results for us. Okay, very interesting. So the majority of respondents are in the 0 to 5 years. We have within 5 to 10 years, 23%. The next answer is no consideration of water risk, and then some companies looking at much longer term, 25 year plus, which is great. And then finally 80% looking 10 to 25 years. So thanks very much for that. That's really interesting. Into more detail about how to carry out a long-term water risk assessment and develop plans to mitigate risks, and also take advantage of opportunities that are associated with water. Does a business get a handle on what water risks it faces over the long term? Well, we have a framework that shows you our idea of the steps involved in a long-term water risk assessment. Quadrants are the steps in the assessment. The boxes around the quadrants are some of the questions that need to be asked at each stage. Right, is just a guide. The methodology and techniques required at each step will depend on the nature of the business or operation being assessed. I'll go each step in more detail in the following slides. The first step is to set the boundaries of your water risk assessment. You will need to think about 4 dimensions of risk that I highlighted earlier. You need to find which business functions to include, the types of water to look at, and what include your supply chain and customers in the assessment. The assessment could be carried out at the scale of a single site, a pool of sites, a region, a nation, or global operations. I would advocate looking beyond the fence at the issues in those catchments where your activities are taking place. You need to decide how far into the future you want to look. I think that a minimum of 5 to 10 years is required to develop understanding of longer-term risk and resilience. So pushing the envelope out compared to the poll that we saw earlier. Before looking at the future, I think it's worth thinking about how vulnerable the business is to current water risks. By identifying how the business has been directly or indirectly affected by past weather events such as floods or droughts. What happened? What were the effects, including reputational or financial consequences? It's also useful to consider the water status of the catchment your business operates in, competition for resources or a surplus, known flood risks or water quality issues. Which stakeholders have an interest in water management and stewardship? You should think about how the business is currently affected by water regulations and the extent to which they may limit current operations. The tools that can help with this assessment include many of those listed on the previous slide. However, the aim with this step is to get a thorough understanding of the business baseline position in terms of water risk. To achieve this, step needs to be more than a tick box or reporting exercise. This looks at how water risks and opportunities could change in future. You should identify what the major internal and external drivers of change are for your business. For example, they may be political, economic, relate to social changes, technology, or environmental changes. Once this is established, we can think about how these factors may change over time. In the next few slides, I will show some examples of techniques that can be used to develop an understanding of how drivers could change over time. Having improved your understanding of the future, you can also consider whether the future presents any new opportunities. A technique that we have been using recently with success is scenario planning. As a brief overview, scenario planning is a qualitative tool for considering the future, method for developing alternative but plausible storylines of how the future might unfold. The idea of creating stories that consider a range of uncertainties is to try to bring some order or place plausible boundaries on our ideas of how the future might develop. Graphically represents the scenario planning approach. We can past. The challenge comes in trying to predict the future. The future goes in a number of different directions, but we can try to predict that are based solely on past trends. The other scenario is to describe contrasting futures which are on the bounds of zone of uncertainty. A, B, C, and D on the diagram represent 4 different scenarios of the future. They should be extreme but plausible. However, there are no probabilities associated with scenarios or equally likely. It is very unlikely that the future will turn out exactly as described by scenario A, B, C, or D. But if storylines are stretched far enough, the fit that does develop could lie somewhere within the boundary of the cone. Atkins has recently used this approach to develop scenarios for the UK water sector in 2050. Our scenarios are constructed around 2 axes: the availability of energy and our societal attitude towards the environment. This is 4 scenarios which we have described in detail in a report which can be downloaded from our website, global.com, and there'll be a link to this at the end, the landing page at the end of the webinar. We worked on Trent Water recently, used scenarios to test different strategy options and identify no-regret actions. Regret strategies are those that appear to have benefits regardless of how the future develops. Scenario planning is an example of a qualitative technique that can help us think of long-term water risks. Supply modeling is a quantitative technique that can be used to forecast changes in water availability and indeed quality. Understanding where your business fits within this, from suppliers to factory floor and even to customers, can influence what decisions you may take around innovation and investment. The supply balance will be different in different locations and situations, and so it's important to be flexible in your approach. Presenting an example of the impact of climate change on a supply-demand balance. Large deficits are projected in future. Uncertainties, represented by the dotted lines, are very significant. Once the problems have been identified, it is to look at solutions. In this case, we reviewed a large number of actions which could be taken to close the supply-demand balance. We grouped the actions into 3 different pathways. This showed that each pathway would start with the same low regret, robust options. The regret for more significant investment depends on the level of future change. Pathways start to help understand what options may be required and by when. We also used modelling to look at water quality and future risks. A team of experts to develop a GIS tool which apportions the contribution of different sources of pollution within a catchment. There is an example of source apportionment for phosphate in catchments in East Anglia. The pie shows the relative contribution of phosphate from different sources. It represents phosphate coming from sewage works. Those sewage works are the largest point source contributors in many catchments of phosphate, not the only producers of it. It also comes from our diet. Products in daily life often have tap water to prevent lead entering drinking water from old pipes. The other in the pie charts show phosphate coming from industrial sources, livestock and arable farming, roads, urban runoff, and septic tanks. A piece of European legislation governing the water environment is the Water Framework Directive. The aims of the directive is to improve the quality of water bodies. Water needs to be graded as at least good to comply with the legislation. There is the baseline grading of water bodies in the east of England. Blue and green catchments comply with the Water Framework Directive. Yellow, orange and red catchments are non-compliant at the moment. We can see the effect of different options for improving compliance. This shows the effect of taking measures to reduce pollution from agriculture. The model can also be used to estimate the costs associated with measures. In this case, for agricultural measures, this is estimated at £1.3 billion. The effect of imposing higher water quality standards on the water-using sewage works. The cost of this measure was £300 million. So a flavour of how some of these techniques can be used. We go and map future flood hazards. There is the different levels of hazard associated with breaching of the flood defences under an scenario of sea level rise and storm surge. Although extreme example, it demonstrates how flood risk climate model data can be used to inform spatial investment decisions, or at least risk management processes. This extends beyond your own infrastructure to look at supply chains. In the fourth and final stage of the risk assessment, you start to identify what needs to be done to manage risk and the most of opportunities associated with water. The output of this stage is a prioritised management plan. The plan sets out what needs to be done including opportunities to work with stakeholders, what is needed, and how success will be measured. You might want to prioritize no or regret actions, as they are to deliver benefits regardless of whether risks materialize. They're used to inform what the business strategy and investment planning, and where significant uncertainties, these can be fed through to research programs. It's important that the assessment and management plan is revisited at regular intervals to track progress and to update it as new information becomes available. Once you've got a handle on future water risks affecting your business, you can prioritize them through when risks or opportunities might occur, and the potential financial and other consequences can help prioritize those risks. This step can be summarized in a table, as in on the slide. Current water risk tools are useful, but they can be limited in terms of their temporal, spatial, and vertical scope. It's important to look across these four dimensions to get an understanding of water risk. With a four-stage assessment for undertaking a bespoke risk assessment, I've also highlighted a number of techniques which can be used through the assessment. The aim of doing a risk assessment is to develop a bespoke, prioritized management plan that increases your resilience to water risks and minimizes opportunities. That's my presentation, but we're time now for some questions. I'll ask Alison to chair this part of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Nathan and Jeff. That was very informative. Now we're going to move on to the Q&A session. We've got some questions for you. The first one is, what's the value of looking as far as 2050 when everything is so uncertain over that time scale?
Well, although the future is uncertain, but on that time scale, by exploring different future scenarios, it is possible to see which decisions now might be robust and which might be less so. Scenario planning has previously been used to foresee various major shocks and challenges, so it's a proven technique.
All right, that's good, thanks. Let's see here, moving on to the next question. Where and how would you draw the boundaries in a supply chain assessment?
Okay, thank you for that. I think it really depends on the nature and complexity of your supply chain. To sort of map out your value chain and identify which suppliers provide what inputs at each stage, and then you can decide you want to include them in the assessment. Have a very large and complex supply chain, you want to prioritize the suppliers you consider in an initial assessment, perhaps in the assessment of those that appear most exposed to water risk, so maybe in this sort of staged approach.
Great. And let's see here. Where there is very limited information on the supplier and their water risk.
Nathan here. I think the obvious answer is to talk to your suppliers. One thing you may want to do is ask them to carry out a water risk assessment to give you the headlines that so you can incorporate in your own thinking.
Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Where have you carried out these sorts of risk assessments before?
It helped a number of clients face different types of water risk in a range of sectors. In the presentation, we mentioned a few projects that we undertaken looking at, say, physical risk from flooding, the risk associated with investing in water infrastructure, regulatory compliance, and also the risks associated with a poor reputation on water with investors, which we think is an increasing kind of area. So our water risk assessments, we've put in place strategies to increase resilience, and we've done this on behalf of clients, the UK, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. We're also currently working with a number of cities in India, looking at how to future-proof cities against future environmental and social pressures, and water is right up there as the number one or very close to that issue.
Here, it's actually regarding management. How do you get the board to take water risk seriously and invest in risk management? And also, any tips and advice you can give on that?
Alison, I think the main thing is really to start thinking about water in terms of the risk to the business rather than just the cost of purchase. There is a cheap resource when we compare it to things like energy, and an appreciation of water risk and the level of vulnerability can have a much more compelling case for your board to take action to invest in resilience measures. So almost, virtually all the risks that Jeff has talked about and I talked about earlier, quantified. You work out the damages that can be caused by flood risk, or the cost that how much we would need to spend on seeking a new source of water. So these figures to help us business case for our boards for appropriate action.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much, Jeff and Nathan, for the presentations. Just want to remind everyone that this webinar recording will be uploaded onto the 2 Degrees platform as well as the slides, and you'll receive an email shortly with this information. And if there are any questions that you have asked and do not get covered, please do utilize our platform and post a discussion under the Water Risk and Strategy Working Group, and we will get Jeff and Nathan to respond. Again, there will be an exit questionnaire just to get feedback on the webinar. If there's anything you would like to have seen or questions for our panelists, please do take a minute to fill it out. I do hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and goodbye, everyone. Thank you.